Welcome to another episode of Once Upon a Quantum Leap. And once upon a time, there was this place called Atlantis, and we're going to be talking about the rise and fall of Atlantis in this part two of the history of consciousness visiting this planet.
You're going to hopefully walk away saying to yourself, am I a light being? How did I travel through all of these cycles of time?
Yeah.
And hopefully you'll walk away wondering, am I really one of those light beings that is part of this history that we're trying to unravel?
Yeah, spoiler alert, you are. We are.
That's
So
right.
let's investigate.
Yep.
In our last exciting episode, we talked about Lemuria, which came before the Atlantean time period. And we can think of these as giant time periods. So it's not just a place, it's not a people necessarily, but it is. But we had Lemuria first, and there was more of a centering of consciousness exploring this planet in the Pacific area first. And then it kind of shifted over to the Atlantic area. And there was a shifting of focus of activity and consciousness and exploration and creation into the Atlantic. So we think of those as the Lemurian time period and then the Atlantic or the Atlantis time period. And then it shifts even further east over to Egypt, and we have the Egyptian time period, which is where a hub of exciting adventure was happening. So those are your general epochs that we'll talk about, and they're punctuated with destruction periods because the Earth was really unstable for a long time, and we just kind of rode around on these unstable portions of land, and some went underwater, and some stayed above land, and some went underwater and then came back up, and it was a crazy time. All along that, we have the development of the forms that we're using, that we're kind of piggybacking in and within and with on this planet. These the Homo erectus and Homo Cro-Magnon man, you could call it, Homo sapiens forms that we're developing. And we bit by bit started segmenting our perspective of ourselves, really. We started thinking of ourselves as separate entities rather than one collective humanity entity exploring
I'm going to
consciousness.
interrupt you, Paul, because you gave a
Yeah.
really good visual when we were debriefing. And I think that would be really important to share with everyone now too about how this individual expression
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
emerged. You gave this visual image
Of the sun or the,
of the sun or the pulsing of energy, a really bright, intense light of energy. So
hmm
go with that because for me
well,
that really helps set the tone of as we move forward into these cycles. Go
yeah.
ahead.
And the terminology of thinking of ourselves as separate. I didn't think this up, but I came across this really great analogy of you can think of consciousness as originating from, you could call it the source, but think of a sun, our sun, and it's shining its rays of light in all directions simultaneously, just blasting out these rays of light. And each one of these rays is the sun, is that source of light. And each one of these rays is shooting off into the darkness. Some of them are landing on this planet, yes. But each one of these rays, you could think of the very front end of this ray as looking out, exploring, exploring the darkness, exploring the universe. And at a certain point, perhaps this perspective of this ray of light looks to the side and sees these other rays also exploring and shooting out from the source. And so that would be the concept of we. We are exploring this, but there's still very much of an identification as source energy exploring. And then what we start seeing as we land on this planet and we start exploring and we start developing these forms and participating in this realm, this physical realm, we start getting the sense that we are individual rays or we're individual beings. It's kind of a trick of perspective, almost like this ray of light turns around and looks back on itself and says, "Wow, I came a long way from that creator thing, from that source thing, and here I am, separate from this creator thing."
And
It's not
and during that projecting out, from that light are those different cycles.
right, right,
Lemuria, right? So here's where we were talking about the last episode of here's what we described in these intuitive reports of what was occurring within that ray of light. Let's sort of use an
right.
example during that time period. And this is what occurred with that ray of light during the early Lemurian into the first cycle. So,
Yeah. This is a
right.
process of millions of years and then down into the first cycle of Lemuria was more like 300,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago. That that period of the emergence of the human form was also the period of us getting this perspective that we are light beings and that we've traveled and have arrived at this realm, this Earth
And
planet.
and there were different variety of light beings,
That is a fascinating little
right?
exploration in itself. We didn't talk a whole lot about that last time.
Yeah.
Um, Apparently, from the intuitive reports, and these are several sources, there were, I think, five different civilizations or five different groups of these light beings that traveled and started exploring this planet. Some were from different origin points, from you would say star clusters, like the Centaurus star system or the Orion star system, or from the Pleiadian star system, or from Sirius.
Things, Orion.
Yeah, the
Hmm.
Sirian star system, Sirius B.
Hmm.
So we had these different light beings all arriving here and all developing these different, slightly different body systems. The bodies themselves were here already. They had been developing according to natural selection and evolution, and then evolution accelerated with the arrival of these these beings, these light beings, which are us, by the way. We were them, and and they are us. And so you had an acceleration of the evolution of these forms, punctuated definitely at about 300,000 years ago.
Mm.
And you had differentiation.
Because we use the words superconscious, subconscious, conscious mind. I asked you the question about, so would we say then that the superconscious would be somewhat part of this space time that occurred in that original like emanation or pulsing of light, his superconscious
Yeah,
perspective?
I would say the super consciousness would be identifying as a light being at that point.
Okay.
I am this light being moving, exploring.
Because I'm from this great light.
I am
So
from the
there,
source. I
I'm
am the
from the
source.
source.
Yeah.
That's right. I'm
Very
pulsing,
connected still.
very
Yeah.
connected still.
Yeah. And then as our perspective starts changing just slightly in this first cycle and into the second cycle, we start gaining the ability to participate in this physical realm, in this planetary realm. And that coincides with the development of subconscious mind. So now we're light beings and we have this subconscious mind that can hold, you'd call that the soul, I guess, can hold these experiences and relate to these experiences and seeks meaning and understanding these experiences. So that would be our participation in the second cycle. And
Right.
there's all kinds of wonderful things that happen in that second cycle. But the Earth is still pretty crazy, pretty volatile and fluid and volcanic and chaotic, I'd
Yeah.
say.
So here's an excerpt from the second cycle that describes what you're talking about.
Oh yeah.
We see that this group, there's a group of people that's focused on a form. And it says, we see that they have come together with the intention of understanding the transference of energy through the form. And in this way, there are periods of time when there is a kind of experimentation occurring, a focalizing of energy on one individual at a time. When the gathering of those around this one, there's a focus of their attention that's keenly on the form to observe as well as move the energy through the form. And then there's times when they're also experimenting with adjusting that are made from the point of origin that comes from this distance. And it's talking about that source of energy that's coming, that source of focalized light. So they're responding to this communication is your example of this ray of light. It's like they're still very much connected to
Hmm.
this form of light, and this energy is still being communicated. This vibration, this frequency is still, I don't know, channeling through,
Yeah, channeling, pulsing through. Yeah.
pulsing through just to start creating these forms. So this is from one of the intuitive reports. And it
Yeah.
says there that there is a collective consciousness, and then the attention, there's an awareness of the attention of this collective consciousness, as well as an attention of this activity that's occurring.
Yeah. That's that we explored a little bit of the
Mhm.
idea of awareness versus attention. Awareness would be like I'm aware of this whole room that I'm in, and I'm aware of things going on outside, but my attention is focused into a point.
Mhm.
And so we start experimenting in that phase of moving attention around and focalizing it here and focalizing it there. And that becomes really important in our ability to create and build things and participate in this physical world is that movement
Mhm.
of focalization.
Right. And again, going back into that moving into the form, out of the form, not necessarily being attached to it,
Hmm.
but it uses the word identifying with it.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can only imagine if
Right.
these poor little animals that are walking around on this planet
Mhm.
and they get visited by some light being that sort of takes them over for a little while,
Yeah.
steers them around, pilots them, makes them do experiments, and then pulls out and then says, "Wow, that was kind of crazy. That was pretty
It kind of
wild."
reminds me of what
Ooh.
little kids do when they're being curious and they're exploring with little bugs, or, they're just
Yeah.
playing with things. It's like, vroom, vroom, vroom,
Yeah,
do
you
this
grab
thing,
this
do that
beetle and you
thing,
make it fly and then you
throw
put it
this,
back
and
down.
poof. All right,
Yeah.
I'm done with you. I'm done with
Yeah.
you. This is what happens when, I throw you off this. That's what that kind of reminds me of. It's
That's
just,
got to be tremendously confusing for these little
yeah,
critters on this
right,
planet.
right, right.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the cycle of the second cycle, right?
Yeah,
And
lots of
also what's
experiments.
and the imprinting of vibratory patterns. So that's the other thing. We talked a little bit about that in the
Mm.
last episode about this is the beginning of the imprinting of patterns that start moving with this individual light being
Yeah. So
into
as
the
this, yeah, I think of
iteration.
it as this light being that is projected into this realm, this world, starts to take on an identity.
Hmm.
Like in the beginning, we have a lot of reports that say this one identified as G sharp, or this one identified as the color amber, or this one identified as the sound ting.
Hmm.
These are vibrational identities. We don't really need names at that point, but
Hmm.
it's more just a pattern of vibration, and that starts imprinting on this soul, this subconscious mind projection that we have that comes from the superconscious mind identity as a light being. So you can see these layers are just starting to to build bit by bit by bit over thousands of years. We get these layers of identity that we stick with. And we also get impressions of maybe why we're here or a particular mission
Hmm.
of what we're doing in this plane.
Yeah. And those identities are, let's see, how can I describe that in another way? Of another example. Let me just use an example, huh?
Yeah.
That the experiences of one of another report. This was the wisdom that would come from drumming and sound and
Yeah.
being connected to the earth. So there's a vibration and a lineage of this wisdom, of this information that's carried over it. And it says here that those between those experiences and the ceremony, this one would use those vibration in different ways to resonate with sound, to use drumming, to heal. And it was just an offspring. So this was a movement of this vibration identity that stayed with this we would call it maybe an understanding in the present time
Yeah.
period.
Yeah. And probably an identification. And
Mhm.
as we started having more and more of these very,
Experiences with those.
yeah, very um, impressioned experiences, we start taking on the identity of that experience too. And I think that's what they really call about, they mean when they say they took an impression or there was an impression in the soul,
Hmm.
kind of like a footprint in this substance of subconscious mind, or
Hmm.
there's a handprint, or there's a face print in this substance, and we start forming around that print, that imprint. And that then draws more experiences, similar experiences of whatever that initial imprint is. We just start exploring lifetime after lifetime that particular pattern, whether
Right.
it's exploration of sound or it's exploration of beauty or it's an exploration of texture or
Or the
there's a,
exploration of the emotional level.
yeah,
Because
emotional level.
that's another thing
Hmm.
that started to occur. There's a lot of disruption in the land
Hmm.
that's occurring. And so one example was of a person being pushed into a form. They were
Yeah, I
pushed
think we
into a
talked about
form.
that in the
Yeah.
last episode as
Mhm.
well. And a tremendous fear and tremendous
Mhm.
desolation and longing and separation. And yeah, we start experiencing lots of lots of these emotions.
And hesitation is another thing that occurred during
Hmm.
that time. There's a hesitation
Yeah,
in on being focused on the form, so that's it. So patterns, I think we also talked about patterns as being um like really fewing, but also these patterns of, yeah, other things that occurred that have stayed with me that kind of are disruptors in my life even to this day. So you
yeah.
have the helpful patterns and the other patterns that you're still trying to work through to
Trying to
understand
shake off. Yeah.
that
Or
become
understand. Yeah.
that are like still part of the imprinting of our identity as a whole. So all of
Yeah.
this was occurring still in the second cycle. And now
Yep.
that moves us into, right, the third.
Yeah. And then we start breaking into this third. Each transition between first and second and third and fourth, and even into the fifth, it's punctuated by a massive destruction of some sort on the planet. So it might have been some asteroids or meteors that landed, or volcanic eruptions, or shifting of tectonic plates, and we talked about that a little bit before. There's another destruction, and most of this Lemurian experience starts really shifting into Atlantean experience, like much more punctuated. Lemurian is now a distant memory, that time period and that land, and everything is going on in this Atlantean experience. And we've got a grand, you'd probably call it an island at this point, um, called Poseidia, after Poseidon. And I think the coolest part of the third cycle which is roughly 50,000 BC to 28,000 BC, is the dawn of reasoning. It's a
Mhm.
time period
Mm.
when these light beings, these superconscious light beings that have taken on this coding of subconscious mind, substance, and participation, are now starting to dip their toe into a conscious mind experience, which is identifying with physical senses, with physical bodies, and really like calling themselves I and me, and this is my body, and
Mm.
I'm separate from other people. I might be in a tribe, but I'm also this separate entity that has its own thoughts and feelings and participates differently than other people.
Yeah.
And with that separation, we can have things like memory and that focalization of attention and imagination all
Mm.
interwoven as reasoning. That's got to be an exciting time period too.
Well, there was on a third cycle example of a person who was was trying to integrate what had occurred to his body. So there was an abrupt change where this
Hmm.
person had been thrown out of the body and then returned into the body.
Yeah.
And in that abrupt change, then the attempt then was to integrate this one, not return it to its form again, but it affected the nervous system.
Yeah.
And so back to the whole reasoning, because there was already reasoning that was occurring. This particular individual at that time period was considered a leader, had some really good authoritative responsibilities and didn't quite have a personality that was always pleasing to people, but got stuff done. Hey, I'm
Yeah.
getting stuff done. And as a result of this accident, the reason I'm bringing that is because as a leader, in getting things done, this person had developed the ability to reason, to use memory, to imagine
Yes.
things,
Yeah.
how to think, how to give direction, how to communicate in a way, but basically to get a lot of things done. But this occurrence that occurred, that was also still occurring, the earth was still moving around. Something caused there to be a really big dysfunction, a force that abruptly caused this nervous system, the physical nervous system, to
Yeah.
jar.
Shock. Yeah.
Boom, something happened. And so the reasoning occurred where people were helping him, let's say doctors. Well,
Hmm.
how can we help this person calm the emotional stability, realign to just create some harmony, knowing that we're never going to get this person back to where he needs to be. So reasoning starts occurring, like I'm imagining what we would see doctors now, like healers back in the time. What can we do to still help? So they were trying to figure out
Yeah.
how to cause there to be some level of harmony while the individual is still developing another type of learning as a result of being in this experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
There's
yeah.
yeah, there's wonderful examples of there's a lot of trauma that
Mhm.
happens just because of the chaotic earth fluctuations. But there's also an acceleration of learning that happens
Mhm.
because of those things too, dealing with the destructions, dealing with the trauma, dealing with the shocks, and healing really takes a forefront in this period too.
Yeah, because it says here that there was difficulty for this one to have a fluid connection from the mind to the body and the body into the mind.
Yeah.
The effects of this, however, allowed this one to rest in different levels of consciousness. So those different levels are not just the conscious mind as we know it, subconscious
Mhm.
mind, right?
Yeah.
Different levels. It would remain there for extended periods of time. This one was able to access a deeper dimension, a broader sphere of perception, than this one had experienced before, and that this one built a stronger connection and an understanding of experience in regards to connection, perception, and love.
Mhm.
And this experience then was something that this one wanted to always go back into.
Yeah.
So
I can
Yeah.
see why. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So
This
again,
that particular report, I know this guy who had this report,
yeah.
and
Mhm.
the significance portion of that report is really interesting. We won't go into it here, but um, it ties in with. I just think it's amazing that this lifetime that apparently happened maybe 30,000 years ago, 40,000 years ago, is relevant to today for this
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
It's still echoing on. I think that's amazing. These experiences that we had 50, 100,000 years ago echo on and influence our choices and our perceptions and our hesitations even today, as if it just happened yesterday.
Yeah, that because what resonated during that time was an experience that related to the heart chakra and heart energies.
Yeah.
And that's
And
where
he's
the
making this today, he's making this really cool shift into coming from a place of compassion and love and nurturing and guidance for others. And
but it
that's
also
why this
states
report.
it's so resonant because it also states here that in the report that this one still at times felt disconnected from that,
Yeah.
again, that source, that pull, and there was deep sorrow that was experienced.
Yeah.
And this one was unable to process. So even that carries over, that echo, that lingering
Yeah.
carried over
There are
into,
other reports that I think some of them are right there as well that they talk about the longing that this person has, or this sense of loneliness, or the sense of disconnection or not belonging. And that happens a lot in this third cycle because of this perspective of separation that's really taking place in this third cycle. You're no longer feeling like you're connected to this home base, or this light that was freely filling you and fulfilling you, that perspective. And again, it's not that we're cut off. It's not that, suddenly we're on our own. It's the perception and our perspective that shifted, that changed, and we became more identified with this physical body and the idea of separation. We're still there, we're still projections of light, but it's just been like encrusted with. I'm banging into my microphone here.
right.
Uh,
So, I mean, just that could just imagine that because as reasoning is starting to develop, the attention, the memory, um, we can go back in time, we can be present, we can go into the future. Our imagination starts to be stimulated and we start to become more enamored with this process,
yeah, yeah.
right? And then that's where the experimentation starts to come
It's like
in,
a blessing and a curse, though,
right?
Like the more projected we go out into this physical realm, the more we lose our sense of connectedness. And yay.
But
I don't know what's better.
we humans started to do some stuff, so we started to experiment, right?
Yeah. Yep. And travel too,
And
and
travel,
migrate,
yeah,
migrate
migrate.
all over the planet. These different star system beings landed in different areas of the planet. We had the development of very early Mayan civilizations, the Himalayan civilizations,
Mhm.
and what else did we have?
Indus Valley, the
Navajo,
Japan,
yeah,
Japan, yeah, all the different
the
yeah,
Aborigines in Australia,
right.
Japanese, right?
Just imagine we're starting to say, hey, we don't have to stay here.
Yeah, we can go to these
We
other places.
we let's what's over on the other side of the block here?
Yeah, there's
Maybe
just
we
more
can.
volcanoes over there. Don't go over there. No,
What
I'm
do we
gonna go
need?
there anyway. Yeah,
What do we need to get there? A boat, you say? What's a boat? Or what's
yeah.
this
Let's
thing
make a
that will
boat.
travel on? What's this thing that's going to travel on water?
Yeah.
Because is there still the ability to like astral project? I mean, right? So we had this physical body that needed to actually move on the land,
Yes. And no. Yeah.
right?
Yes and no.
Right. So what
Um,
was occurring there then?
well, apparently, from the intuitive reports again, the atmosphere was very different back then. Like the magnetics of the atmosphere were very different, especially in the second cycle period, but also into the third cycle. We have different atmospherics, which you can tap into the electromagnetics of the ionosphere in particular ways and tap into the resonance of the planet and develop these ships. Apparently, they had ships that they based on these very crude but natural forces that were available at the time because of the electromagnetics of the planet, which have
Interesting.
since
That's
changed, which is why
yeah.
we go, nah, they couldn't have had those.
Mm.
But, we get warnings all the time of solar flares, and I think there's something called well, there was an event back in the 1850s or 60s. There was a solar flare that blasted the planet. It projected out of the sun perfectly, solar wave of all this electromagnetics. Carrington effect, I think was, or Carrington event. Anyway, the telegraph lines of the time were like lit up, and they very naturally could conduct electricity and magnetics, and they ruined communications for a while just because of this solar event. And just imagine that that solar event was happening continuously for a
Dur
while,
during
and
that time period.
we're blasted with
Hmm.
this solar wind. Maybe you can make use of that for a while until it changed.
Right. The reasoning person starts to say, maybe we can make use of that.
Let's tap into that. Yeah.
What
Let's
what can
get the,
what can we create with this?
yeah, or maybe, a particular shape of crystal happens to gather and disperse this energy just perfectly. And you go, huh, look at that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's use this crystal and let's, shape it a little bit. And look at that. It can receive this electromagnetic energy and channel it in a particular way. And it does these cool things. Okay,
So it's a
let's use it.
combination of all of that was occurring
Yeah.
that also stimulated more creativity of just creating different things
Yeah.
that were
Yeah. Which,
functional and or just to experiment, not just, but to experiment to see if maybe a human and an animal could do
yeah.
these, if I create these, if I put these two things together, what will happen?
Why
And so
not?
there's a lot.
Let's try it. Yeah.
Let's try. What's going to happen here?
Why not? Yeah. What could possibly go wrong if we make a unicorn or a mermaid or
Yeah,
what could
right,
possibly go
right,
wrong?
right.
Well, so imagination wasn't our strong point at that
It was
point.
still developing, right?
Like
And
thinking
harnessing it
seven
and being
generations ahead, what could actually go wrong with
right,
this?
being
Yeah.
being responsible with it had not occurred quite yet. We were
Right.
still like little kids experimenting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, with this one.
That was third cycle.
Well,
And
it's also you also mentioned that we had the beginnings of political division and spiritual divisions.
yeah, just barely starting um in the
So
third cycle.
what was going on
Well,
politically? What was going on spiritually?
well,
When you say
you
that.
could sort of mix the two together because um there was a philosophy of, hey, we are one. We are this one. So Edgar Casey called it the law of one, or the sons of the law of one, and they firmly held to, we are these light beings, and we have arrived. They remembered the history, right? They had all of the steps and stages and cycles in mind. And then there were the ones who had forgotten this, and they very much identified with the physical body. And no, no, we're not one. I am an individual. I'm separate. I can do my own thing and leave me alone, and I'm going to experiment all I want. And that's the basis of the division that started in the third cycle and carried into the fourth cycle and punctuated the fourth cycle.
Mhm.
So we had these, it was a philosophical difference that became a political difference into the fourth cycle.
Did would do you think that we used the word spiritual back then?
I don't
Was it,
know.
I mean, what would, yeah, I know that's what we call it now.
Yeah,
That's language we use now, but what do you think we would use those words, or was it,
I would say probably not, because
were we just
uh,
trying
s-
to,
that sounds like a differentiation. If you say, well, I'm a physical person, I'm a spiritual
uh-huh,
person, that's a separation in itself, in just in the language. You
Right.
just say, I am, I just am, back then.
Mhm.
So as these layers of identity form and the layers in the subconscious, and then this creation of this outer coating of conscious mind separateness
Mhm.
takes place, then we really start saying, are you being spiritual or are you being physical about this?
Mhm.
Are you all wrapped up in your senses and sensory perceptions? Are you remembering your light being heritage and your
Mhm.
core essence there?
Mhm.
Spirit, I like using the analogy of spirit is kind of like air, where when you really think about it, air is everywhere. And
Yeah.
everybody breathes air, and
Breath.
all
Yeah.
living things
Mhm.
breathe. And so we all have this thing in common of air, airness, air quality.
Mhm.
Even rocks, they've got air and they've got gases trapped inside of them. Everything has this air. Um, Many things also have warmth and they have moisture and they have earthiness, like a carbon base to them as well. So those would be your elements of the subconscious mind that are contained in there. But the air permeates everything.
Well,
And
there was also, let's see if I'm remembering this correct one. Da, 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 da. Is able to resuscitate. Um, I think that was maybe going into the fourth cycle. So I think I'm into a different place,
oh
but
yeah, I'm
yeah,
chomping at the bit to go into the fourth cycle.
I
But
know, I know, I know, I know. So
third is
this whole,
great. It's very interesting. It's kind
yeah,
of crazy, and yeah, we get the legends of strange creatures that emerge from that third cycle there.
but we're like tootling along,
Yeah, yeah,
and we're
yeah.
starting to,
Oh, and another destruction happens.
yeah,
Oh,
that's
okay.
right. We were like little kids, like, oh wow, we're kind of, this is my hand. This is what my hand looks. I mean, it's like that. I
Yeah.
just keep
I could
thinking of,
let me create this goofy thing or this, yeah, strange
yeah, that's what the third
beast.
cycle reminds me of. That there's a level of intelligence as well as a childlike
Exploration and
exploration,
experimentation.
whereas
Yeah.
not quite a lot of maturity, but yet little pockets of maturity that kind of
Yeah.
pop in.
Yeah.
That's what I think of with then I think of the third cycle.
Yeah. And then
Okay,
we
take
take
us.
things a little too far in the
Okay,
fourth cycle.
let's go.
Yeah.
We learned some things. We know a lot of
Oh,
stuff
did we
now.
though? Did
We're
we?
pretty smart in the fourth cycle.
I don't know. It was really the height of our experience of separation, of thinking, we are man is the ultimate creator, and separate and powerful and yet weak and disconnected from source energy. And
Well, so
yeah,
what was going on with the land? Like, let's talk about what's going
yeah.
on
So
there, and
between
then how that relates to
28,000
people.
BC and about 9,500 BC or so, we've got, we do have a portion of Atlantis is still riding high. It's just outside of, just past the African continent for the most part. Some of the western side of Africa, but it's out in the Atlantic Ocean. It's a lot smaller than it started with, and but at the same time, we've got the early Egyptian civilization that's chugging along on the eastern side of what we would call the Sahara, which was actually lush and green and forested and fertile territory at that time. And this Egyptian, I wouldn't even call it Egyptian, but like proto-Egyptian civilization was pretty closed off and kept to itself quite a bit. Um, and in this fourth cycle, at the very end of this fourth cycle, where the Atlanteans kind of blew themselves up, basically, the political tensions ran high and the philosophical differences ran high, and there was a misuse of these energies, of these vibrations, and apparently they had giant crystals that could channel this electromagnetic energy, and they fell into the wrong hands, and destroyed themselves with this stuff.
So
And
we've not used the word ego yet on this one. What
that
would you say
would
that
be a
this
good
was?
time to use it. Yeah.
Would be this is the because as this as these experimenters, as we were experimenters during that time, creating, imagining, I
Hmm.
could use this power to do this. No, let's do this. Arguments starting to ensue. My idea is better than yours. I want
Yeah.
power over this idea. It's almost like I'm growing up to be a teenager. Like I really know all of this.
Yeah,
I know
man.
everything that needs to be done now
Yeah.
because I
Don't
have
tell
all
me
this
what to do.
experience. Don't tell me what to do. I can do this better.
Yeah.
And so this other level of pressure is starting to occur of um, this energy is starting to feel, but the land is also starting to do that too.
Yeah. And we're intimately entwined with the the evolution of this planet. I don't know which one is cause and which one is effect, but we are paired with this planet um, as we arrived on this planet. So as the land sinks, we also sink poetically. Like our sense of connectedness with the source, in effect, is submerged when Atlantis sinks. And it's submerged under this perspective of conscious mind, of this I'm separate, I'm a physical being for a while, for quite a while. We're under this illusion of separateness. And that illusion of separateness, I think, is really what drives power um, collection or power seeking.
Mm-hmm.
So civilizations and kings, and they try to grab power, they try to grab land, and resources are seen as scarce, and so you want to get what you can while you can because of the scarceness and the limitedness of this perspective.
So there was a couple of different things that occurred. So a couple of reports, I'll probably mingle some of it, but there was still quite in the fourth cycle transitioning into the land area of Egypt. This one particular person was part of a lineage that remembered
Yeah,
the cataclysm that was occurring, and this one's awareness was focused on the need for healing. And what this one brought with it was this mystical origins that were remembered. So this was part of a long devotion to these mystical origins. So this part talks a lot about um, how we worded it, the political and the spiritual divide.
yeah, yeah,
So this, what was occurring for this person was a remembrance of, no, we were devoted to something really pure.
yeah. Like the law of one or the sons of the
Very
law of
much
one.
devoted to that. And there's some
Yeah,
healing, there's some things that are already powerful and resonant that if we stay with it, that will help us move forward.
yeah,
However, the land was starting to explode
yeah,
and yet other thoughts of how different people were reacting was also occurring. And so anyway, that was occurring. And so healing was one of the bigger things for this person at that time. But it also said that in that time period that this person still, I mean, just think of it. I mean, just you could hear the cries that still echoed in the air of the landmass disruption, people that were harmed
hmm,
because of the landmass. I mean, just things that were being destructive and people dying and just wails. I mean,
yeah.
it even says that just, I could keep hearing the wailing
In the inner levels, yes,
at the inner
echoing on and
levels.
on.
It's
Yeah,
still, it's
the
like, whew,
suffering.
the suffering was still there. And
Yeah,
this person was still trying to hold on to and heal in the best way they knew how based on this lineage of mystical origins of healing that had been carried on for, from the female part of the family, just carried on and on. But you could only do what you could.
yeah. And it's pretty overwhelming at that point.
Yeah. Could you imagine
You've
that?
got a continent of people that submerged in. Legend has it that it was a day and a night that it blew up and sank, and tidal
Wow.
waves and volcanoes and hurricanes and you name it, and it happened.
Wow.
And it must have been just fantastical. And that was us again.
Yeah.
And so we have that impression, whether we were in some outlying land and witnessed this, or we were in it and we witnessed
Mhm.
it firsthand. We lived through it firsthand,
Mhm.
like some of these
Mhm.
reports talk about.
Mhm.
And that makes an impression on humanity. That's one of those impressive events that echoes on and on and on for lifetimes after that,
Yeah.
and shapes your choices and shapes whether you try something and don't try something, or it shapes who you are or who you think you are for lifetimes after that.
Yeah, there was
So
a
we
shock.
have,
There was
yeah,
a
go ahead.
shock wave. Yeah, there was a shock wave that began to hit fourth cycle. Um, there are many that were injured, and this one was one of them. And so this one was just unable to do anything to handle the pain in the body. But yet you still had others that still carried in this healing resonance that would come to try to energetically heal others
Hmm.
as well as sustain it. And then attention, again, back to reasoning, it started to just keep developing. But the splitting of the awareness, we see that when this happened, the splitting of this one's awareness from the collective into the individual awareness was part of the emotional impact. So a
Yeah.
splitting. So here we have this. Talk about that one part,
Well,
the
that,
splitting.
yeah, that coincides with the final submergence of Atlantis, is that splitting of subconscious and conscious mind perspective.
Mhm.
And those are big old words, but it's really about how you identify yourself, right? Do you identify yourself as this fluid light being that can channel source energy for real, not just an idea, but for real? Or do you identify yourself as a member of this tribe and this family and um, this particular group of people? Um, that's a splitting of identity that happens.
And it's not as easy as, um, do I really identify with this? It's not that easy as
Yeah,
it's when you say for real, like do you really,
yeah.
it's
We can say the pretty words, but
but
like,
it's almost like you become so engrossed is the word with
yeah,
this
yeah,
emotional space that it's almost like boop, I've closed the door
yeah,
to these other things that really are me. They're not just part of me, but they are me. But I've closed the door and I've started to just totally immerse myself into this is what's really starting to be real. These
yeah,
emotions are real. I feel the pain.
yeah.
Yeah,
This body is me and
this
I am
body is,
suffering. Instead
yeah,
of this body suffers, it's I am suffering
right.
and I am in pain. And
Hmm.
yeah, I am afraid of dying and death.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's the shift of identity that
I
happens.
am angry at you for doing some things. It is your
Yeah,
fault that this happened.
yeah.
Or
And
why
and
can't,
emotion becomes a driving force, or
right?
a thing to avoid, or a thing to ride and surf towards creation, or
Mhm.
yeah, emotion becomes very important at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just pretty intense.
Yeah. Well, with that last destruction comes a lot more migration that happens as well.
Mhm.
Some could see it coming, some could predict it coming because of reasoning, and some are completely taken by surprise with this final submergence in nine.
And some of them were just feeling, responding to the earth. Some were still very connected to, oh, here's what's
Right.
going to happen.
Yeah. Oh, well, we're going down. Yeah.
We've got to,
Let's
let's pay
let's get
attention.
out of here.
Let's get out of here.
And some went to South America, to the civilizations that were going along on down there, the the earliest forms of the Incan or the Mayan or the Aztec civilizations, to the Minoan civilization up in Greece, and Sumerians, and even the Chinese, all the way across the globe. They had their start way back in this 10,000 BC time period, where these migrations, these these people leaving Atlantis, knowing what's going to be happening here, they left and they settled in other areas of the world.
I have a question, Paul, about the migration and the origin of races. The
Yeah.
did that tell me what do we know about that? What does the reports tell us about? Because I'm just imagining. Well,
Yeah.
you tell me before I start going off.
Um, as best that I understand, and I am always open to understanding a little bit more, as best I could piece together from the multiple sources of intuitive reports, the races happened simultaneously, the arrivals happened simultaneously, the developments, and you can think of it as oh, they're identified as color these days, but it's more of an emphasis on particular senses that were emphasized and heightened, and particular qualities and abilities that were heightened in a particular race. So you can think of it like maybe you hold up your hand and you say, my thumb is really good at this kind of thing, and my first finger is really good at that kind of thing, and middle finger and so on. Each finger is particularly suited and really good at a particular kind of exploration in the physical realm and and manipulation. And that's the idea that I have of races. Each is a particularly suited for maybe a particular part of the planet or use of the senses in a particular way. So in that, none is better than the other. It's just
Mm-hmm,
different
mm-hmm.
and tailor-made and suited for particular purposes.
Yeah, because when people migrated, it's like we did need to adjust to wherever we were migrating to.
Yeah.
Therefore, the senses and the body
Had to adapt
adjusted,
and adjust and yeah.
compensated, adapted,
Hmm.
and it formed different body structures, different body um, um,
Morphology. Yeah.
yeah, morphology of it. Yeah. But internally, nothing changed. I mean, it's just we were still
It's still us. Yeah.
us.
It's
Yeah.
still
It's just
light beings inside.
hmm
Yeah. That's
hmm
what ties us all together.
yeah. And again, I think that was just part of the evolution that occurred.
Yeah.
You know, the
Yeah.
the
Evolutionary forces,
the
pressures, environmental
mhm,
pressures.
mhm,
And also, if you have a small population that's isolated, then you start getting particular genetics are emphasized and some genetics are de-emphasized just because of the small population sizes.
mhm.
And so you get differentiation pretty quickly with
Yep.
these isolated populations.
Right. Because the planet's evolving, we are evolving.
Yep.
We are
Definitely.
evolving, the planet is evolving.
Yeah, we're intrinsically tied
So
to
we're
the
intrinsically tied
planetary
to,
evolution.
uh-huh.
Yep.
And we're getting a lot more intelligent. We think,
We think. Yeah.
right? We've made some pretty good decisions, wise decisions, or decisions made out of wisdom. Some just made out of my idea is better than yours. I'm going to go for
Yeah. Or
it.
sheer dumb luck also.
Right. That plays into it.
Or some catastrophe happens and you invent your way out of the catastrophe and
Mm.
hey, look at that. We made it. And we've got this invention now too.
Yeah. So
So
in
after,
some ways we began to be scientists the way we know how is now. We've always
yeah,
started to
trial and
become,
error, experimentation,
right?
right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. At the end of this fourth cycle, along about 9600 BC or so, give or take a few years. I don't know precisely, but it's
I'm
been
going to quote you. I'm
tracked
going to
to
quote you on
about
that.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Then we start emerging into what we would call the fifth cycle, which would be our today cycle, our modern history, we'd say. And we have an ice age, a little ice age for a little while, a few hundred years, I think. And we've got a bunch of extinctions of large mammals.
Well,
And
you called
then
that a big flood, a big cataclysm,
there's a
an
big
ice
old
age.
flood, yeah, and a big cataclysm, and then things settle down after a while. Um, and dry land emerges, and we start rebuilding these societies and civilizations, and we start having records of writing and inscriptions, and from then on, we call it history at that point.
And so, why do we call it the Egyptian cycle in these intuitive reports? Because it's just the land, right? Land proximity of land to Atlantis.
Um, Mostly because the Egyptian civilization was the the hub of activity after Atlantis sank,
Okay.
the sort of dovetailing into each other. But the Egyptians were well known throughout the world, and uh, they had the highest technology of the time, and that was just the place to be. It
And
was
so it's
grand.
just as far as the intuitive reports are concerned, when it
Yeah,
references Egyptian cycle, it's more like
it's a time period. It's
it's
also
a
a place, and then it's also the people
it was
that were
pretty
there.
prominent during our historical
Yeah,
time period.
yeah. The
Okay.
poor uh, Atlanteans that tried to they tried to go over to Egypt because Egypt was famous and um, was quite the place to be when the Atlantean continent sank for the last time. They tried to get into Egypt, and the pre-Egyptian people said no, go away.
Oh, how
Ah,
rude.
yeah, and they
So,
actually like repelled them back like an
wow.
invading force, and they said no, but they couldn't hold out forever. There was quite a movement, like a political movement, to allow these refugees to come in.
Well, there
And
was another report talks about the land area of Egypt where thousands of people gathered. So, like, thousands of people were gathering in honor of, in celebration of, in anticipation of this king. We do not know which king this was. But what occurred was, just imagine all of these people coming together. And it's so, no one was afraid. It was because we're celebrating. We've been waiting for this. Sound is moving. They're drumming, there's ceremonies. There's just this intense things that's impacting the energy movement throughout. But yet, once it's all done, one particular person gets separated from her family and doesn't
yeah,
remember what land area she came from. And she was what, 14 or 12 at the time? I can't remember. I think it was 14. But gets separated. But in this separation, she's technically they've migrated for a celebration, but now this migrant has stayed in this land area. And poor kid, a lot of them got displaced from their families. And
yeah,
so it's like, hey, we were all really nice when this whole ceremony started, but now you got to stay away. You can't stay. You can't stay here anymore. You
yeah.
either got to leave or
Go back home. Yeah,
you got to isolate yourself. So us humans, as kind as we've been, we have not been very
yeah.
kind when we
We have
start
a history of
develop
unkindness just as
when we
much.
start
Yeah,
developing, right? When we start
yeah,
developing this. But also I always like to look at, so what's the silver lining in this? So as part of this separation, this young female started to explore it, could easily do still astral projection, and
yeah.
was when moving into these inner realms of the mind, could hear what is now called prayer, the lamenting
Of
voices
her
of the
family.
mother of her
Yeah,
family trying to reach out to her. But this person, she didn't still know that she could do one thing but couldn't do another. It was still trying to distinguish the vibrations.
yeah,
So it's also, I find this captivating because when there's still destruction and disruption that's occurring, learning is always still occurring.
yeah. You
Right.
never quite know how you're going to use this situation. It
Right.
might be a horrible situation. There might be a way to use it to learn and to understand creation
Hmm.
a little bit more, a little bit
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
That's kind of the theme of of all of this is we've seen that there's destructions between every one of these cycles, and then there's the birth of, well, a new kind of cycle and a new participation and a new exploration.
Hmm.
Let's go with that. And then there's a destruction, catastrophe, and a new thing arrives and a new thing develops. And
Yeah.
after the forest fire, that opens the seed pods of these pine trees to sprout and grow, and there's a new wave of things that comes because of it. So
Yeah.
that's kind of our history, is making the best out of these crazy situations that we find ourselves in,
I know
and getting inventive in the process.
and we do it somehow. And here we are, Paul,
Yeah.
you and
Oh,
I
we're
are.
still doing it to this very day, trying
So
to
we,
make the best out of weird situations. Yeah. And
um,
learning, and yeah, trying to get back to that perspective of I am a light being, like for real, not just pretty words about it, but really feeling it, sensing it, owning it, knowing it, understanding it, being that light being.
well, as we exit out of this episode, because we didn't talk about spiritual man, intuitive spiritual man, but that I think will be peppered into all of our other discussions.
Our
But the
capstone discussion. Yeah.
but I'll leave you with this, Paul. Would suggest to this one to practice dissolving the boundaries of the physical body, perceiving the subtleties of the connections of the environment to nature, to the planet, the solar system, the galaxy, the universe, where this one palpably senses that there is no boundary. The truth of connection, oneness, humanity existing as one entity. It is imperative for what is coming in this one's life and future. What is true for the individual is true for all. This is all.
That says it all right
Says
there.
it all.
That's a great quote.
See you next time.
Once Upon a Quantum Leap is for your reference only. This podcast and the material is intended solely as educational information and should not be used for diagnosis or treatment of any health problem, financial, or legal advice.
You can listen to full episodes and find out about Paul and Capucine at onceuponaquantumleap.com. All reports shared on this show have been released with permission, and identifiers have been removed for individuals' privacy.
The intuitive reports referred to in each episode are available on our website, on the podcast page, and through links in our show notes. We encourage you to listen to those for greater context.
If you're interested in obtaining your own intuitive report, go to quantuminsight.co. That's quantuminsight.co. You can listen to us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.